Hello everybody, hello, hey, hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Katie and today I wanted to do my 2020 reading stats and adjustments and goals for 2021. Today's mug is Let It Snow, which I know is very Christmassy, but where I live we only get a little bit of snow in January usually, so I will drink this until the end of winter. In 2019, I ended up starting a Excel reading tracker and I continued that on in 2020. So it tracks so much great stuff. I have found tracking my reading this way is really fun and it's definitely informative for how I want to read in the future. The reading tracker I use is I start with the base from Portal in the Pages. I'll link her down below. It's got a great spread of starting things, but I have tweaked it a little bit for my own purposes and I am going to tweak it a lot more in the future to continue to track things that I haven't been tracking that I think are important. In 2020, I read a total of 60 books. I actually did yesterday my best books of 2020 and in that video I included every single book and the rating that I gave it and then just talked about my top 10 books of the year. So if you're interested in the specific titles, I'll link that video and you can go and check that one out. My highest month of the year was August when I read 9 books and my lowest month was January when I read 2 books, and on average I was reading about 5 books a month. This spreadsheet actually tracks pages, so it works out to about 2,125 pages per month. My highest page month was actually in March with 3,502 pages, and my lowest page was in January with 674 pages. This actually makes sense. Even though I only read 7 books in March, one of my 2020 goals was to read some of the longer books in my TBR because in 2019 I read 100 books, so I was picking up a lot of short books and neglecting those lengthier ones. So March I read a lot of chunky books and that's why there's only 7, even though it's the highest page count. By far my most read genre was fantasy, with the subgenre of high fantasy taking the cake with 13 books. But overall I read in 19 different genres and subgenres, which I think is pretty good. And of those 60 books, I read 8 nonfiction books this year. The majority of the books that I read at 33% were between 300 and 400 pages. Oh, here's a really interesting one, I think. So of those 60 books, 45 of those books were via audio, 2 were ebooks, 5 were paperback books, and 8 were hardback. So I literally would not be reading as much as I am without audio. I listen to audiobooks on Libby, which is a library app, and there's a bunch of different library apps like Overdrive and Hoopla that you can see if your library is a part of, but you can download audiobooks for free, and you know, it's amazing. You don't have to pay for audiobooks, which is great. I read 37 adult books and 23 YA books. I didn't pick up any middle grade this year, which is usually I pick up 1 or 2. My average star rating for the year was 4 stars. I had a really good reading year. I actually didn't read any 1-star or 1.5-star books. My lowest rating was a 2-star and only 2 of those books ended up as 2 stars. The majority of the books I read were published within the past 3 years. So 2020, 2019, and 2018, and then it slowly lowers as you go back in the decade, which is interesting. I think that's a product of being on BookTube, to be honest. I read 58 new books and 2 rereads this past year. Something that I started tracking in the middle of the year that I want to continue on is I ended up reading 13 first books in a series, 7 books that are somewhere in the middle of a series, 6 series finales, so I finished 6 series this past year, and then 34 standalone books. And I think that's really interesting. I started a lot of series, but I also finished 6 series, which is another goal of mine, to push through series that I start. So I had 42 or 70% of the books that I read were from female authors, and 16 were male authors. 2 of them were multiple authors slash co-authors, etc. This is what kills me. 51 of the books that I read, so 85% were from North America, 4 of them were from Oceania, and 5 of them were from Europe. That's an area for improvement for sure. 39, so 65% of the books were from white authors, and 21 were from authors of color. That works out to about 35%. So I was pretty much 50-50. 43% were new to me authors and 57% were authors that I have read from before. I also have the ability to track bought and borrowed books to see how much books I'm accumulating, but I kind of fell off the tracks of that in 2020, so I don't have accurate data to share with you, which is one of my new goals of 2021. So that is a quick look into my year in books. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the stats that I have. I don't put hard numbers on these statistics because I just don't want to kind of start to fill quotas and all that stuff. It's just not in my personality to do that, but it is nice to see some of those statistics. Like, I can look back at the countries that I'm reading from and really see that I am reading American authors. That's where I'm from. That's what's being pushed to me. So it's going to take me a little more effort to go outside of that comfort zone next year and expand my horizons. Which brings me to some of my changes and new things that I want to track and just general goals that I want to accomplish in 2021 as far as reading goes. So let's start with changes to the spreadsheet that I want to make. I think I want to keep almost every single category on my spreadsheet. So what I track right now is title of the book, the author's name, the genre, number of pages, the age group, the format, so audiobook, hardback, ebook, etc., the star rating. I track the date started and the date that I finished, the published year, if it's a reread, and the series that I talked about. So if it's a first in a series, middle series, standalone, etc. And then authors wise, I track the gender, their nationality, the continent, the race in a simplified version, so white versus POC, if they are a new to me author, and then I do break it down into a more detailed race if I can find that from the author, because I am interested in those numbers for myself. One thing that I do want to start tracking in this spreadsheet is if I am reading books from my owned TBR, if I'm chipping away at my physical TBR, or if I'm reading books from the library that are just new releases. So that's something that I am interested in tracking just to see where my reading priorities are. I would also like to figure out a way to track the LGBTQ plus representation in books and authors. That is not something that I've physically tracked, and it's something that I'm interested in tracking for 2021. Another thing I do want to start tracking is my unhauls, specifically which books I'm unhauling, so I can compare my bought and borrowed books to my unhauls and kind of see what that is going to look like. I also want to see how much I'm bringing into my TBR, how much I'm unhauling from my TBR, etc. And the last thing I want to track is I actually did a spreadsheet for my entire TBR and all of the stats on my TBR, and I included publishers on that one, and it was honestly mind-blowing how many books were from the big 5, now big 4 publishers, and that is something that I want to make sure I am tracking because I didn't really realize there's so many imprints of those giant publishers. I didn't realize how much I was not supporting indie publishers or self-published authors, and that's something I want to do in the future. So let's talk about my 2021 reading goals. I want to read 52 books this year. That is a consistent goal for me. I think it's achievable without pushing myself, but it keeps me on track with this hobby that I love. It keeps me from falling off track, and that's just 1 book a week on average is what I want to read. Generally, I would like to read more diverse across the board. I don't think that goal is ever going to go away. Again, like I said before, I don't like to put numbers on things. It just feels very quota-ish to me. I never want it to get that way, but I do want to intentionally read more diversely. Specific goals for diversity reading next year is to read more books from trans and non-binary authors, as well as more Indigenous authors. I want to get my physical TBR down to about 75 books. It's currently sitting at over 110. I think we're around 115 right now, and I am still excited about all the books on my TBR, but it is something that all of those books sit next to my bed. It's starting to overwhelm me a little bit on how many books there are, so I want to make a conscious decision and effort to get that number down. I think ultimately I would like to see my TBR sit at around 20 or 30 books, but I'm not going on a book buying ban, so I will be continuing to bring new releases into my collection, and it's just not realistic for me to say I'm gonna go from 115 down to 20 books in 1 year. And my last general goal is just to read more nonfiction. I read 8 nonfiction books this past year, so I think raising the bar to at least 1 book a month on average is a good goal for me. I can't remember whose video it was, but they were talking about reading goals. Maybe it was Lena Norm's that I watched, or might be books like Whoa, I honestly can't remember, where they were talking about setting goals, fun goals, as well as goals for your reading health. And sometimes there are goals that you need to make for the betterment of yourself that aren't exactly like read more fantasy, you know, that could be a goal of mine, but I do want to read more nonfiction of a variety of topics, and I think 12 is a good number to start with. That is it. I don't tend to go crazy on my goals just because this is a hobby for me, so I don't want to ever stress myself out like I did before where I had to take a break. So that is kind of my general goals for 2021. I do have a backlist, top 10 backlist books I want to read. I did that video this past Sunday, so I will link that if you're interested in some of these specific books that I want to read in 2021, as well as some anticipated releases. I've done those videos already, so you can check them out if you want to. I think that is going to be it for me for today. If you guys use a reading spreadsheet, let me know maybe who has a really good one down below. I really like the one that I'm using right now, but I'm always open for new ideas and new ways to track things. If you liked this video, give it a like. You can subscribe if you want to. You don't have to, but I do have a link to register to vote down below. It is never too late, in my opinion, to go ahead and register to vote, and I will see you next time. Bye!